Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We're joined by a very special guest here today with us. We have Brian Goldman, Dr. Brian Goldman, here to talk about his new book, The Power of Kindness, Why Empathy is Essential in Everyday Life. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be speaking with you, David.
So, tell me, what is White Coat Black Art?
White Coat Black Art began as a book that was originally, and in fact, a show concept that was originally entitled Medical BS.
Okay, all right.
So
let's get that out of the gate.
Yeah, let's get that right out of the gate. Basically, it was about it. The concept behind the show, behind White Coat Black Art, is the disconnect. It started as pulling back the curtain and revealing the innermost thoughts of health professionals and what really is going on in the culture of modern medicine. And from a physician point of view, but also including nurses, paramedics, social workers, and all other allied health professionals.
Sure.
Depending on whether we see them as we, the larger we, us and them, and the us and them shenanigans that can go on inside the sliding doors of the hospital. And so the whole concept behind medical BS was the disconnect between what health professionals tell patients very earnestly, or what they say in public, when they're being quoted in the media, and what they say to each other. And I wanted to be able to reveal what they really mean when they utter medical BS and things that they know or believe to not be true.
So give me a good example of medical BS.
Okay, so an example of medical BS is the influenza vaccine is a highly effective vaccine, and or to say that the influenza vaccine is the most effective way of preventing the flu, which may be true, but it's missing the fact that from year to year the effectiveness varies, and it
Right.
can be as low as 15% or 10%, which is not very effective at all.
Right.
So,
right.
but when you say that it's the most effective, that's a relative as opposed to an
Sure.
absolute benefit, and or for instance, when a pharmaceutical company says that their wonder drug can reduce the risk of dying as a complication of a disease by 50%. And what they mean is it can reduce the number of deaths from 2 patients per million sufferers to 1 patient per million sufferer.
Right.
And that's a 50% reduction,
but
as an absolute reduction, it's utterly meaningless.
Yeah, when you drill down to the numbers, not sounding quite as impressive.
And so my and that's what the show is all about, and it has evolved. Originally it was telling stories mostly from the perspective of health professionals, and people enjoyed that. People were saying, "Wow, I've never heard this before," but it has morphed into talking about the patient's experience, or the experience of patients and families within the culture of modern medicine. Well, that way you get both of them.
Well, and what I love about just the way you've described it is it sounds digitally empathetic. Does that make sense? Like, here you are presenting this show online for people to listen to, blogs, podcasts, writing, and through a digital meeting, and yet with this empathetic edge. Because it's about listening, really, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. and that's my whole. I mean, that's how I connect with people I interview, and that's my stock in trade. And whether I'm doing interviews in the studio or field producing interviews, I want to really understand people and I want to connect with them. And I would say that I found a kindred spirit in Alan Alda, who was on our show earlier this season.
Oh, wow.
And he wrote this wonderful book. If I understood you, would I have this look on my face? And his whole thing is connecting with people, engaging people,
right,
and relating to them. As they call it in acting, and in fact, for me, when I interviewed him, the challenge was, would he just see me as another interview? Someone who's mining for some original quotes and stories that have never been told before,
right,
or would we be able to find
scoop.
a way of connecting? And so I read his book. I read it carefully, and I don't just read information. I'm putting 2 and 2 together.
Making connections.
Exactly, and my book, and that's what my book is about. Not just profiling some of the kindest people on the planet, but trying to figure out on some level what makes them tick.
For me, one of the threads in your book is, and by the way, congratulations. What a great title. I love the starting point. I love the presupposition. I love I need to do a little shout out here. The philosopher in me. You open up, much like The Road Less Traveled, with this wonderful question or statement. You say, "Am I a kind soul?" As an existential question, it's right up there with "Why do I exist?" I mean, this appeals to, as my listeners will know, this appeals to the philosopher in me. The Socratic edge comes out. You've tipped your hat right out of the gate on the book, and I love that. And but for me, the thread is that every story, every person matters. That's kind of what one of the takeaways for me.
Well, I'm glad that that's what you're taking away from it, because that's certainly the thing that, in the arc of my own life, my own professional and personal life, that is the most important thing. And whether it's somebody who has an interesting background because they've accomplished a lot and they've been lauded and praised, and people quote them in the media and follow their every move, or whether it's a homeless person who has a story to tell about the final break from their family of origin, and often it's not a pretty moment, but certainly when I got into documentary production 30 years ago, it was clear that the my mentors taught me well. They taught me that everybody has a story to tell, and you just have to sit and listen to it, and you'll find out what it is. Empathizing with other people was certainly part of my journey. I knew I used it one of the things I wanted to find out was am I still a kind person?
Right, right. And yeah, so tell us a little bit about that journey. So were you, I guess maybe the other question I can ask, or another question to ask, is were you a kind soul? So is there a before and after here?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I would say that now, then, and for the rest of my life, I will vacillate back and forth from I am kind to I'm not kind, and that's part of what makes me run. That's what makes me roll. I am motivated. One of the things I discovered in that before the book, but also it was my understanding of myself was solidified during the research for the book. That a couple of things, I guess, that we present different sides of ourselves to different people at different times, and some of those sides are kind and some of them aren't. And sometimes I'm motivated by a desire to truly connect and understand, and other times I'm motivated by a desire to feather my nest and get the story, get the interview, get that original really interesting thing, and sometimes I'm really connecting with the other person, and I'm really worried about what's going to happen to them, and I want to protect them, and other times I don't feel that way at all, and it depends on whether I'm working in the emergency department or with my immediate family, with my partner Tamara's family, which is a different tribe,
Right.
and whether I'm in a social group, whether I'm supposed to be having a good time, or whether I'm not supposed to be having a good time, whether I'm faking that I'm having a good time, so that I'm one of the most important things I learned is that at all times, at the highest levels of executive function, empathy is a choice. Kindness is a choice. It's never an imperative. And if someone tells me it's always an imperative, then I'm thinking they're a martyr.
So, do we choose to empathize because it's going to benefit us? I mean, you say there's. I kind of went to the Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, we love to polarize, right? We really do. I mean, even those of us who say we're inclusive and are willing to listen, we still like to compartmentalize and put people into boxes and labels and label things. Is that a problem for empathy and for your project? Pushing towards kindness, a more kinder world.
The short answer is that it could be a problem. It's a problem. I think I don't think it's a problem if you're constantly doing things that are universally considered good. And in general, we are hardwired to be empathic and kind because it's pro-social, because it makes the world a better place. And at its most elemental, we wouldn't be raising our children if we didn't have. We'd be abandoning our children.
Right.
Instead, we bond to them almost instantly. And if you were to do a functional MRI of my brain and my child's brain, when we're really connecting with one another, when we're clicking, then we might very well, the same centers of our two brains are lighting up at the same time. Certainly, that's the case with mom and newborn baby. But there's the tension between that urge to be kind and connect with other people, and that other, and that's probably a higher level function, and then that other more primitive part of our brain that cannot resist under certain conditions separating ourselves into us and them, or ourselves and the other. And certainly you have seen that, particularly in the United States these days, and
Right.
Certain countries in the EU that have been electing leaders that are nationalist. And nationalist to me is code for the big us and you them, and you're not us. And that's why we have to erect borders and build walls, as Donald Trump has talked about in the United States. And by the way, and it's not just what he's saying. He's just symbolizing it. It's what people it's what people in the United States are saying. And frankly, I worry about it. And I think us and them is in its ascendancy right now. And so that's some of the bigger picture tension. us and them versus our desire to be kind. Then there's also you raised a really interesting question, and that is, why am I kind? If I am a kind soul, or am I truly a kind soul, or am I simply trying to garner a reputation for kindness?
Right. I'm working the system.
I'm working the system, so people are going to say, Brian's a really kind guy.
Yeah.
And that opens up a lot of possibilities. One of them is that I could be kind for the sake of solidifying my sense of superiority over somebody else.
Yeah, it's kind of, is there any such thing as a purely unselfish act? I suppose would be a similar question.
Oh, I think and I think there is. I'm walking across. I fantasized about walking across a street and with my daughter and not seeing the car coming and pushing her out of the way and taking the blow myself and just I would do that in a heartbeat.
I love how you say, this is going to stay with me, Brian, and thanks for that. We bond with our children. We don't abandon them. I mean, if that's not a predisposition towards inclusion, I'm not sure what is.
Yeah, and it's not always easy.
So let's just agree. We know this to be true, most of us, let's say, globally. But do we actually practice it? What did you traveled the world on this one? You and I want to talk about neuroscience as well, and I want to touch on what robots had to teach you too. So there's lots to talk about. But yeah, we know this to be true. But why is it so hard to practice?
I think it's hard to practice because it depends on where you live. It depends on what your lifestyle is. I think that there are, for every individual, the factors that coalesce around, are they net kind or net unkind? Do they use their powers of empathy or not? There certainly they'll be as individual as you and I and everybody else who's listening to us having this conversation right now. But I think there are some common factors. Is meanness on the rise? I think it is. I think that you're hearing more talk it's being amplified in the media, in social media, separating us and them. People are trying to gather their communities and they're trying to figure out who's us and who's them. And some of the us's and them's are built along religious and ethnic lines, but I think they're also along lines of philosophy. Like I think conspiracy theorists are coalescing around each other, around people like Andrew Wakefield, who is still going around saying that MMR vaccine causes autism, even though he lost his medical license. And he has found kindred spirits in conservative America right now. He's relocated to Texas and he's become a darling there. And he's not alone. There are he's aided and abetted by Russian bots. And they're trying to sow discontent and disbelief over the effectiveness and safety of vaccines. Maybe sending out messages that say only rich people get the good vaccine. You're probably getting the lousy one that they wouldn't give to animals, or and stuff like that. But then the question is, why do those messages resonate? They resonate, I think, when you've got people who are under stress, as I think many people are, and the stress comes from stress over security or fear over security. The security may be security regarding your life, the defense of borders, the perception that people are going to come and take your lifestyle away from you, precarious employment, precarious economy, precarious housing for some people, and I think the failure of modern democracies to take care of everybody, take care of the largest number of people, and instead of relying on bromides and capitalist philosophies that may have worked decades ago, they are They are, but have begun to fail. And I think that there's a failure in liberalism today, for instance, to articulate a vision for people who have lost their jobs, who have found that they don't know where they fit into the economy anymore. There's a lot of 40 and 50-something men who, for instance, who have no idea who they are or what contributions they have to make. Well, if that's how you feel, then you're going to be fearful that you're going to lose what you've got. You're going to be angry. You're going to be under stress. And under those conditions, it's very hard to empathize with other people.
So anger. So it's kind of a chicken egg thing to some degree, I suppose. But yeah, if you're starting out with anger, if that's your first thing, you're probably not going to bend towards treating others with kindness, respect, including, embracing, and so on.
Or if you're so angry, angry that you think something's been taken away from you, and that can be fueled by that. I think politicians are very good at pushing that button. Certain politicians, fear. So if you're living, if you've got anxiety that you're under threat, so that your fight or flight response is on fire, your adrenal glands are on fire. That's going to fire up a part of your brain called the amygdala, and the amygdala is the part of the brain that separates us ourselves into us and them, and so you begin to see some of the connections between external or social phenomena and what's actually going on in the brain.
Context, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here to some degree. I wonder. You certainly present this beautiful argument, narrative, the personal thread and so on through story, and this position that says there really is no downside to being kind, but would you say that there might be? I mean, maybe there's a perceived downside, or for folks who feel like they're anxious because they're threatened, or they're living in this world of fear and anger and so on. So there's a perceived understanding that I can't be kind, therefore. Because it might lead me, I might become too vulnerable, or I'll be taken advantage of, and so on.
Or here's another one, that you might be ridiculed by your in-group. That your in-group might say you're a wuss.
Right.
You don't know how to be tough, and that's the I think there's a difference between defending borders, for instance, and making sure that the media takes photos of kids in pens, who are that's just saying, look how mean we can be. That's like it's almost a shaming experience, and you can imagine that some people will not be lauded for demonstrating kindness in a moment like that. They might actually be ridiculed or laughed at. And,
well, Brian, isn't there a sense when I want to say there's a perception that being kind is weak, and you kind of fly in the face of that. This is what good leaders do. This is what good parents do. This is what good people do. We empathize with others.
Yeah, and we have at the moment certain role models in the world. We have a president of the United States who doesn't do that. He doesn't appear to shed a tear. He doesn't appear to care about anybody other than himself, and he's the alpha male at the moment. And there are some people who believe that he makes Prime Minister Justin Trudeau look like a wuss by comparison. And there's the I have to say I'm a Trekkie. And I remember, watching. I remember the old series, the original series of Star Trek explored some very popular science fiction themes, and one of them, very early on, it was an episode, I believe it was called "The Enemy Within."
Oh yeah, you're a
Kirk
Trekkie, all right.
Split into I am all right. Split into two Kirks: the mean Kirk, the nasty one, the one that's a bit of a sexual abuser and drinks alcohol, but is decisive. the nice Kirk who stripped away of his, and you have Spock on the side who's calling the plays, who's saying, look, fascinating to look at this human being split into two, and this that somehow the nice, the empathic, the kind version of Kirk is not decisive,
right?
And I think that we have that fear. I think we have that fear that strong leaders do the tough things. By the way, as I found out, as I talk about in the book, as you know from reading the book, some strong leaders are probably what we would call successful psychopaths, and psychopaths don't have empathy. Well, they have cognitive empathy.
Well, and I wanted to bring up this idea of, and I love it, Machiavellianism. You know, you do touch on that a fair bit in the book. This I don't know if that's exactly what you're referring to, but some people are wired in a very particular way.
Yes, and they are. So if you are a member in good standing of what is referred to as the dark triad, either having a psychopathic personality disorder or a narcissistic personality disorder or a Machiavellian personality disorder, then you are challenged, certainly in the empathy department, at least as far as feeling other people's pain. It has been argued that psychopaths are excellent at cognitive empathy, and that they use that insight, that ability to imagine what it's like to be somebody else, not feel their pain, but imagine what they might be feeling and have a pretty accurate read on that, and that they are able to use that to manipulate their victims into doing things that they want.
Right.
They want them to do, like give them adulation, or if they happen to be a conductor of an orchestra, contributing to the orchestra's foundation, becoming major benefactors, and they're very selective at who they are kind to, who they pay attention to, and who they don't. So they, the particular orchestra leader that I'm referring to, that Scott Lilienfeld talked about, major conductor of a major North American orchestra, that this person was uncannily kind and attentive to benefactors, and treated his orchestra like poop, and this is of a kind that I'm certainly familiar with. I have met physicians who are amazingly kind to patients or to donors and treat colleagues, allied health professionals like poop.
It's so fun. I've certainly had we all have had our experiences of the Canadian health system, and on one hand, it's wonderful, it's marvelous. We have access and opportunity, and I work in international development, so I've seen some pretty at-risk health systems. But every now and then you come out of a situation with one of those healthcare practitioners, and you think, wow, maybe you should have went into real estate, or
or cars, or used cars,
or used cars.
That's
yes,
right.
I felt like I just had my oil changed today. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that, Brian. 30 years treating patients, ER doctor. Did it chisel away at your empathy?
Yeah, it did, and I would say that there was for me a big reveal, and for me the personal reveal was that I think it came as much from the mistakes I made as being told by a family once that I was very unkind, and that one hit me.
Yeah, that's got to be hard.
Yeah, and in large part because patients and families may not know medical competence when they see it. They may be able to argue it. Maybe they have a physician in the family. I can always argue that physician that they know who's telling them that they should sue could be doing it for all kinds of other unkind reasons, like Schadenfreude for a colleague, or maybe an opportunity to appear to be the hero to the family, implying without actually saying it that had they been the doctor in charge, that this mistake would not have happened. Which is but when a family calls you unkind, they there's a better than average chance that they've got a handle on kindness, and they've seen a side of you that maybe you're not happy that has poked through.
What's fascinating to me is that you received it.
Yeah.
That the soil was fertile.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm fascinated by that for a variety of reasons, because so many of us would probably just sort of respond with more unkindness, right?
Or defensiveness,
or
lash out,
yeah.
which is what I had been, and I guess I was in the right mood. Maybe and I had enough of an adult, because your first reaction, you're reeling when you receive a letter like that, and I did. This was a multi-page letter, beautifully written, and it was it was laser-like, and it was true. But I spoke to my chief. And either he or I first noticed that this letter was not sent to the regulator. It wasn't sent to the College of Physicians and Surgeons or the State Medical Board. It was sent to me.
Right.
So they were trying to reach me. When you send a letter to the college, you're trying to hold my feet to the fire and make me uncomfortable and afflict the comfortable. Whereas they were trying to reach out to me, and I was fortunate enough, I guess, to receive the message. Somewhere along the line, I decided that the worst thing that people can do, human beings can do to each other, is to be bothered by somebody else's behavior and never tell them. The tyranny of the silence.
There's a responsibility there, right? We're back to choice.
Yeah. So they wimped out, and what does that tell you? That tells you that they are. They think that expressing their opinion, first of all, it's not just that this is how I feel, but that's true. I'm about to deliver the universal truth to you. And I remember as a kid, somebody said, "How come nobody likes you, Goldman?" I mean, that was said to me when I was about 14 years old.
Wow.
And why would I still remember that as if it was yesterday? Well, maybe it's a little thing called shame that Brené Brown talks about.
Yeah.
She's a wonderful author who has written extensively about shame, but she tends to write from the perspective of a woman as if she is a woman, but also that women have a monopoly on shame.
Right.
And that men have no shame, and there are all kinds of cultural reasons that might be true, that women may be more shame prone than men, but I am a shame prone guy, and and it was through it was the way I would beat myself up over errors. I'm around all kinds of people in medicine, and not so much in medicine, no, in journalism. Yes, where they make mistakes, but they don't act as if they've killed somebody.
Right.
When they make a mistake.
Right.
Some are more perfectionistic than others.
Right.
Some are very perfectionistic, and others aren't. But in medicine, there is a predilection for perfectionism.
And it's understandable, right? I mean,
really? So you mean understandable in the sense that well, of course they should never make a mistake. But where does that come from? And I think that perfectionists drift into medicine because many of them are shame prone. Many of them are hoping that if they do enough good work, and of course this is all unvoiced, unspoken, because most of them would never see a psychiatrist, because if they did, then that would stigmatize them. They would show that they're weak. But I believe, this is just my opinion, that the shame-prone people in healthcare went into healthcare to do enough good works to try to throw the monkey of shame off their back, and of course it doesn't happen, because as soon as they get caught out making a mistake, watch the defensive-ness of healthcare professionals. I didn't do that. No, it was his fault. Or in a really tough voice, they give you 70 reasons why you're wrong.
Right.
Instead of hearing it.
Right.
They don't want to hear it.
Yeah. Proudly determined. Yes.
And families, and and when families have a medical mistake and they meet the hospital's rolling their eyes because they've already labeled the family a complainer. If they're having a meeting, they've probably already labeled the family as complainers, and that's like the second act of unkindness, the second injury after the the medical error. And the book for me began as an examination of empathy in healthcare,
Right.
and that's what I pitched, and the publisher, I think, wisely said, that's too narrow. Why don't you go out into the world?
Yes. See what's going on out there. Collect some stories. We've barely scratched the surface. We're gonna have to wrap it up in a couple of minutes, but we haven't talked about neuroscience. We haven't talked about what does a story over science have to tell you? Where is truth to be found? And it sounds to me like it's almost. I mean, it sounds trite to say truth is found in the anecdote, but in a sense, that's kind of what's going on here. And I love that about what you've done and how you've stepped out into the world to learn more about empathy. Is it fair to say that part of the reason the soil was fertile for you is that the letter was written in, well, you used the phrase laser focus, or laser, I think you used the word laser, but it was a kindly written letter about your unkindness?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it's fair to say that I think you're bang on, I think that there are many definitions of kindness, and one definition is
That's
when
good.
Someone actually takes the time to point out that your shoelaces aren't tied properly, or that you don't understand. You've got a lot of gifts, but you're also coming across like this. And I think a lot of us don't take the risk of saying that to somebody else because we're afraid that we're wrong. We're afraid that it's going to have a bad reaction.
Right.
And this man, the husband of this patient, was not afraid. He was fearless. He was also in pain and grieving, and he needed to have, I guess, some closure. He also needed to know that at the very least, the circumstances surrounding his wife's death, at the end stage of a degenerative disease, that to give it more meaning, that it would have more meaning if somehow that experience had a lasting impact on the doctor, and it did.
And isn't it beautiful that he stepped out, that he took the risk, and look what it leads to, right? I just love that incremental power to change.
And David, and I'll say one more thing about that. Of all the people I met, Ted Fontaine, survivor of Indian residential schools, 2 of them in Manitoba, who suffered, unspeakable horrors, unspeakable abuse. Was an alcoholic, is an alcoholic, and yet pulled himself up by his bootstraps, overcoming PTSD and alcohol use disorder to become a leading light in his community, the author of his own book about his experiences, when I went through the experience, like he's the mentor to the spiritual advisor to and the Indigenous advisor to a project in Manitoba called Embodying Empathy. So this is taking funding from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to create a virtual version of an Indian residential school. Now, I went through a prototype of that school, and I had a flashback to the day I had the strap. I got the strap as an 8-year-old. And the thing that I will never forget is that I told this story to Ted Fontaine after I had interviewed him, and he, I took it was a big risk because I was apologizing as I said it. He could have said, go away, whatever. So you had the strap. That's nothing compared to what my people have experienced. Instead, he empathized with me. He went out of his way to empathize with me. And the thing that I've learned is that it doesn't matter how much pain people have experienced. You're at the crossroads, David. You can either be consumed by that pain, or you can use it to empathize with others.
Yeah, it's so good.
And that's what he did, and that's my mission too.
And what's beautiful too about that, and then maybe this is where we can wrap. I've got so many more questions. I think we need to do a part 2 for sure. But this idea that you show us that we're wired, scientifically wired to empathize with one person at a time, but you also show us through story, through other experience, and stepping out into the world that this is also true. That this is how we can actually change the world. You don't need the many. Focus on the one.
Yeah, and in fact, as that's one of the criticisms from that wonderful book Against Empathy, which that's also out in the air right now, that you can't empathize with the people.
Right.
That's one of the Achilles heels of empathy. Paul Bloom's book Against Empathy, that you can't empathize with the people. So if you have a persecuted people, you can only empathize one person at a time. It's not the Achilles heel. It's a limitation of empathy, but it also tells you that it's the way to achieve empathy.
Right,
and
right.
If you achieve it, connect with somebody, one person at a time, then you can change your life and you can change their life, and then watch them pay it forward and watch the ripple effect over the months and years and decades.
Well, I think the letter leading to the your book and your project and what you're doing is evidence of that. And thanks for your time today, Brian. We've been talking to Brian Goldman about his new book, The Power of Kindness: Why Empathy is Essential in Everyday Life. Am I a kind soul? Is the question that we should be waking up and reflecting on tomorrow morning. Thanks so much for your time today, Brian.
You're welcome, David. Nice talking to you.